Kira is kind of an idiot, not actually obviously, but the older I get, the more I realize how silly a lot of Death Note is. Light Yagami is the prime and sole suspect in an investigation that spans 6 years, spearheaded by a globally recognized detective with a 100% conviction rate. And I'm not gonna lie, I feel like bro gets away with it for way too long. He's incredibly smart, sure, but if someone were to ask me what Light's greatest asset is, I would have to say his luck. I recently started rewatching Death Note with my girlfriend, and there are so many times I was left thinking, yo, how thick is this dude's plot armor? And so it got me thinking, what are all the times Light could have or realistically should have probably gotten caught? There are about 4 major instances where I think the story could have gone incredibly different, and the last one in particular I think is the biggest plot hole in the entirety of Death Note. But before we go too stupid, hi, my name is Rayshawn Gibson. I make video essays on nerdy stuff. If you enjoy this video at any point in time, you should like the video, and if you get to the end card, YouTube will recommend another video of mine that you'll probably like as well. Let's get to it. From the moment Light gave away his location in the Kanto region, he was working on borrowed time. The fact that this happens in the second chapter of the series is a testament to his recklessness, narrow-mindedness, and ego. In fact, I think Light kinda leaves breadcrumbs across the entire story. The first point I can think of is the mistake of allowing Soichiro Yagami to have access to classified documents associated with this case after his son became the prime suspect in the Kira case. I think the Yagami household was already dysfunctional before the story starts. They have a nice house, but the only thing we see of Light's home life is he has a dad who spends all his time at work and a mom who we only see expressing love over his many achievements. But the fact nobody notices his sudden withdrawals and the many bizarre conversations and noises he's making in his room is kinda weird. Also, can we be real for a second? I know it's a meme in the Death Note community, but there is no way on earth his family didn't hear him talking to himself in his room. Going on that same line of thought, I think the whole time they had cameras set up in his room is weird. Nobody thought it was weird that a 17-year-old boy just stares at pornographic magazines for extended periods of time without touching himself or even showing visible signs of sexual attraction. That's not something I think would have gotten him caught. I just think it's weird that nobody ever points it out. Even still though, something to note about this whole ordeal is the fact that Light is the only suspect in the Kira case. Death Note isn't a cat and mouse, more so a game of chess. L knew it was Light basically from the beginning. L and Light are incredibly similar characters and the motives for the things they do are the same. They're bored. Realistically, every point after he starts narrowing down on Light, our lives lost to ego. L's game was to prove Light's guilt beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt. Realistically, if they decided to bring Light in for questioning and left him in hold up for a month like they did after Misa Amane joins the picture, his hands would have been tied. The interrogation. Speaking of which, the exact moment they arrested Misa Amane with objective evidence of her being the second Kira, Light should have been absolutely cooked. But Rayshawn, they did arrest Light. Let me cook for a second. Nobody expected the second Kira joining the case, but I think we can all agree Misa Amane is an idiot. The task force found both her hair as well as clothing fibers attached to the tapes the second Kira sent in, meaning that at best, Misa Amane was an accomplice to the Kira killings, and at worst, she was literally Kira. L corroborates this because he literally says, they arrest and lock her up. L warns Soichiro that he's also apprehending Light as the prime suspect in the Kira case. You know, her boyfriend she just started dating the day after they let the main suspect of their case go into town looking for the second suspect of their case. What were they thinking with this, by the way? Light's whole plan here fringes on Misa giving up the Death Note and losing her memory so she can't confess, but what? I'm not lying when I say this stretch of episodes are my least favorite on rewatch because the plan is convoluted and silly. Me personally, I would have arrested this dude on principle. You don't need a confession to charge someone with a crime. They had DNA evidence directly linking Misa Amane to the scene. And while they're not entirely sure on how she did it, this would have been more than enough to charge her and compile evidence while they wait for her to be prosecuted. Given the suspicion of Light being the other Kira, they could limit visitation rights and go from there. They knew she was the second Kira, and just letting her go after putting her in lockup because, well, maybe she forgot and lost her memories. That's not a defense. She still did it. That alone would be enough to keep Misa, and at that point in the story, Light needs Misa to catch L. Also, this really bugs me. One of their suspicions was literally that they were performing killings with special powers. Like, I know this is nitpicky, but the fact that nobody tweaks after seeing this, is it just me? I'll come back to that though. Also, after that happens and a new Kira emerges, the task force just pretends as though that evidence doesn't matter. They don't even consider that Light could have been Kira at some point and lost his memories, in which that's still something that needs to be placed under scrutiny because we've already established that Kira is incredibly smart. That's not even taking into consideration the fact that the murder stopped for 2 weeks after their initial incarceration. The evidence here is an absolute, but like, even still. And it's not like Light had only killed society's Yagami's worse. We had confirmation Kira had killed innocents as well. I said it at the time, but every minute bought is a life saved. It's because of luck Rem falls in love with Misa and kills L. It's because of luck Light just so happens to be the son of an officer they choose to keep on the case. I think the biggest card he had in his deck, minus working with supernatural powers, was the fact that Death Note as a series surrounds the two smartest individuals with incompetent dummies up until the latter half of the story. I feel like I'm gonna lose my mind talking about this, but if we're on the topic of the task force investigation, why on earth does L keep the Japanese task force around when they did nothing but grunt work and proved they were incredibly incompetent and biased? I understand they needed help with the Kira case. He and Watari are only two people, but there were major missteps with this being the crew you ride into battle with. Let's get the obvious out of the way. What is gained from allowing Soichiro Yagami to stay connected to the case when the prime suspect is his son? He is going to be biased in his decision making and will impede the case. It's called a conflict of interest. In fact, that's exactly what he does. I can see him wanting Soichiro involved to gain trust with the other task force members, but how useful is that when there are objectively smarter and more efficient teams of people connected to Whammy's house? We know L has contacts beyond Watari. While they might not be as effective, a monkey on a typewriter would have been more help to the investigation than Soichiro, let alone Masuda. And I'm not directly insulting his intelligence. Compared to L, everybody looks dumb. And there's the truth that dude wouldn't want his son to be the most prolific serial killer in human history. These are understandable emotions, but these are supposed to be trained law enforcement officers. Leaving him on the task force definitely contributes to Light going free for so long. Another thing that is super dumb to me is the fact that none of the evidence they got was ever brought up again. I understand L deleted all the files before his death, but what about the evidence everyone had seen and still had access to? What do I mean? So what happened to the security footage from Light's room? I'm talking about before L deletes all the files. You would think the literal moment they find out that Shinagamis are not only real, but you can see them when you touch their death note would be the ultimate nail in the coffin for Light. Yes, the fake rule threw a wrench in the investigation, but hey, watch this. Does anyone remember that time a few months ago when we had Misa Mane in lockup and her hair just magically started floating as if something invisible lifted it? Maybe we should check the security footage to see if she did lose her memories. In fact, while we're at it, should we review the footage of when Light was arrested and see if anything lines up to a dialogue? It's such a glaring plot hole to think they didn't immediately review any and all footage they had ever recorded associated with the Kira case. Have Watari touch the death note in secret, go into hiding and review all the footage. They would have irrefutable evidence to the fact that Misa was not only the second Kira, but the heavily implied truth of Light being Kira. But that's all the more reason to ask. Instead of having the kill switch get rid of all the evidence, why not send it to Whammy's house first and then kill switch? There is no way on earth Light should have had that much time between this scene and this scene. On the topic of L's death, does nobody question why the Shinigami decides to kill L after he gets suspiciously close to solving the case? Why would testing the death note make him die instantly? Why do none of them question why L and Watari are the only ones that do die? If that's not enough to sway you, this is what I think is probably the biggest plot hole in all of Death Note. The most annoying part of Death Note to me is it feels like with all the evidence L presents, Light is very obviously Kira, and every time Light had a rebuttal, they were just all like, well, that settles it, L, he's innocent. And they never double back to that. 5 years is a crazy time for nobody to notice any signs. Was the task force just playing Uno waiting for Nier to join the story? I mean, like, shucks. We get a whole explanation about this elaborate scheme to burn his bedroom down if they try to get close to the book, and that's just never brought up again. You would think they would get search warrants for every place Light has lived in since the Kira investigation started, once he was officially arrested by the task force for a whole month. I'm sure Light would have moved the death note at that point, but at the very least, if a fire were started and an officer were harmed by the booby trap, they could officially charge him with a crime. With both he and Misa arrested, the killings would stop, and if they had already given the book to Higuchi, it would have literally only been a matter of time until they caught him too and learned all the rules of the death note, giving them an opportunity to formally charge Light Yagami as Kira. High key, I dream for another L Saves the World type novel, where when they get super close to discovering he's Kira, he just decides to go on the run, with the latter half of the series being Light building his cult while the detectives try to bring him to justice, working around a world that deifies and protects the killer. This is just a small list of things I think should have gotten him caught. Like I said earlier, Light is incredibly intelligent, but when you take stock, you begin to realize how thick his plot armor is. The detectives were fighting an uphill battle from the beginning, and obviously there are a lot of missteps he makes in the latter half of the story, but that's kind of the point at that point. Once Once L dies, Light believes he is completely untouchable, and he gets caught because of that. But I'd be lying if I didn't say there was one little thing that really bugs me about Death Note, and it's these gosh darn tourists. I know, Kettle, my name is Pot. It's so nice to meet you. What I'm talking about is people who try to justify Light's evil as necessary because he had morals that were even kind of correct. Guys, the only reason Light wants to be a god is because he's a sociopathic narcissist. Where am I going? Just how was Light able to get away with killings for so long? It's because he's the villain. It really does something to me when I see fans posting clips with him and L together saying they're friends, or that he was right all along, or that Misa should have gotten a better ending because she was manipulated. Light Yagami is one of the evilest protagonists in all of anime. I feel like you're kind of missing a lot of the subtext of the series if you believe anything he says. On top of his luck, one of the reasons Light gets away for so long is because he's a master manipulator. He's like Walter White. He exalts himself and does bad things for his own personal power fantasy. The only difference between the two of them is that one admits to his folly at the end. Light has no moral high ground. The moment he gets the Death Note, he starts thinking about people to kill to test it out. In the manga, after he gets the Death Note, he was already planning on killing someone. It just so happens he stumbles on the dude holding the priest coolers captive. After that, he mulls over whether or not he'll kill a school bully. The only reason why he doesn't is because he'd get caught killing people he has a personal connection to. It always blows my mind when people say Light was right and that he should have won, and justify his character when they make it abundantly clear that Light is a sociopath. He already had the desire and plan to use the Death Note to kill people to make his life more interesting. He just wanted any reason to morally justify his reprehensible actions. Everyone hates Nier, and the reason for that is because he had to fill the shoes of one of the most popular side characters in all of anime. But I think he was 100% correct in his description of Light Yagami.
In the end, you're nothing more than a crazy serial killer. That's all you are. Nothing more and nothing less.
I've seen people say that he only kills criminals, but that's like objectively not true. Let's not forget that Light killed Lind L. Taylor in front of a national broadcast to prove a point. Yes, he was slated for death row, but Light didn't know that. Both Ray Penber and Naomi Misora are killed for trying to catch him. You can say they were done in self-preservation, but after the bus jacking, Light says that he thinks Ray Penber doesn't suspect him at all anymore. Okay, because the FBI was on his case, you can say he had to get rid of the 11 FBI agents in Japan, but one of the rules of the Death Note before it was retconned is that anybody who writes a name in the book can never go to heaven or hell. So was it not incredibly sadistic to have Ray Penber write those names in the same binder he takes later? If he were as righteous as many Death Note fans ascribe, what was gained from that? Let alone waiting and revealing his identities to both he and his wife before they die. He also resigns his dad to that same fate. I know people aren't the biggest fans of Nier, but it had to be him and Mello to take down Light because L was too personally invested in the game he and Light were playing. Even after seeing Light had clearly changed and literally predicting his death, he resigns himself. Me? I was pulling out that chopper. The second I would have seen bro lovingly holding me with that evil grin talking about, L is dying. Watery, quick, lock the doors, release the carbon monoxide. That's right, we all dying today. Say what you want, Nier and Mello were about that action. That's why I didn't really bring up anything that happens after L dies, because for the most part, Nier and Mello were on the ball. They didn't care about the red tape, they didn't care about public perception, they knew Kira wasn't a divine force and wouldn't resign themselves to it. They were on a hunt to defeat the killer who believed himself to be God. Light Yagami instilled fear into the entire planet. I think both they and Light were at their most powerful here, and ultimately the only reason he loses is because his pride led him to underestimate them. Even the task force starts seeing Light for what he really is. People say they're not as smart as L, and that's kind of the point. Their combined efforts and unwillingness to play Light's game combined with his ever-growing pride and ego are why his tower ultimately fell like Ozymandias. He was nothing more than a cold-blooded murderer playing judge, jury, and executioner. Light Yagami is no god, he's not even a man, and that's why he got caught.